welcome to the Dancing Bear Enlightenment Academy Holistic Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Beverly. Today we have a very interesting guest, Cath Lloyd. She is a resilience life coach, helping families end sadness and restore happiness after a difficult change in their lives. She is a TEDx speaker, author of When Dad Becomes Joan, author of 4 Steps to Emotional Freedom, How to Be Happy Again after painful life changes. She is a lover of life with a continual path of discovery and living her new normal. Her talk will be 4 Steps to Emotional Freedom, How to Be Happy After Painful Life Changes. Welcome, Cath.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here with you all.
Oh, we're happy to have you, and we're interested in what you have to say. So tell us your story. How did you get into this? What was your transformation?
Well, I've always been interested in people because I taught in adult education for over 25 years. And then I needed a lot of help myself when my dad in 1987, so I was 23 years old, suddenly announced that he was going to start undertaking gender reassignment surgery. And it was a total shock to everybody because, I always say my dad was an expert in deception and fooled everybody. And I found it hard, that my dad suddenly or seemed suddenly to want to be somebody else, even though he had known since he was 5 years old that he wasn't who he was showing as being. And really, it was through that struggle. And, I did like most people do, you swish your thoughts, your silly thoughts and feelings to one side, tell yourself you're being silly, that you're selfish, there's worse things happen at sea, and all of these sorts of things. And then gradually the anxiety and the stress got too much for me. And for me, counselling didn't really work because deep down I knew what the problem was, but I wasn't willing to admit it. And then, like most people, I started delving in free life coaching courses and worked my way through it and out of it the other side. And that's when I started to move from teaching to life coaching, did my life coaching qualifications. And actually, teaching and life coaching work really, really well together, especially when you are teaching very difficult people. And then to reinforce all of this, in 2017, my son had a tragic mountain bike accident and broke his neck, and he's now quadriplegic. And so what I learned going through my dad's transition and my struggle and how I got myself out of my personal struggle with it all really helped me with managing my thoughts and feelings around my son's accident, around his hospitalization for a year, his disability, and all of us having to learn our new normal. And that's a snapshot version of it, really.
So was your father still married at the time?
Oh, yes, and my parents stayed together. They lived as companions for the rest of their lives, and which is very rare. But that just shows the strength of their characters, their relationship, their marriage. And it wasn't perfect, but how many marriages are perfect?
Yeah,
and it's really my mother's strength, her delving deep and looking at her values, that kept us all together. Because if they'd separated, it would have been a whole different story.
Did you have other siblings?
Yes, I've got an older sister.
Okay.
So, so yes, it affected all of us, especially my dad's brothers, and yeah, and some people in the family still struggle with it. And of course, when Joan passed away, it was how do we talk about this in her eulogy at her funeral?
Mm,
Because she was two people to
two people.
us,
Yeah.
and there were two sets of friends and work colleagues at the funeral as well, and everything had to be accounted for, but also being very empathetic to the rest of the family. So, you know, it's an interesting journey through the whole process, but like, any good parent, they leave a lot behind, even when they've passed away, to help you keep building on your own strength of character and how you're going to manage life. And so, if my dad didn't become Joan, you know, he might have had a very different story for his life that wouldn't have been so positive.
Mm. And it would have been very different for you and the rest of your family because you all had to learn to deal with something that a lot of people never have to deal with.
Well, yes, that's it. And in 1987, there wasn't Mr. Google to turn to, there wasn't Facebook to turn to. And I didn't know anybody else's dad who had changed gender, let anybody else in the world. I'd seen it on the telly, and that sort of thing. And so thankfully it is talked about a lot more, but it doesn't mean to say that family members still don't struggle.
Yeah. 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 I've met several people and have some friends that are going through that kind of thing with family members.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you help people? So when you're working with people, how do you help them through their struggle? Do you have any techniques you use or, process? What do you do?
Well, excuse me, my methodology is my 4 steps to emotional freedom,
Mhm.
and it's a cycle. So it's about putting your hands on your heart and really practicing self honesty. And this is what I learned through my process of struggle. It's about listening to really what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your head, and understanding it, and really learning about yourself, understanding it, all the difficult things, all the guilt, all the shame, of all these thoughts and feelings that you've been having through, a difficult change, acknowledging it, um, finding your way forward, and then taking action. And that every action you take has got to then go through that cycle again. So it
Mhm.
isn't a one-stop cycle, it's a continual rolling journey. Because of course you could get to the end of the first cycle and think, well, actually, I've got this quite wrong. We've all done it, haven't we? And we thought, oh no, what did I do that for? That's sending me way up in the wrong direction. And so that's where you've got to go back to the self-honesty stage and learn about how you think and you're feeling about what those 4 steps that you've just gone through. So then you can start working out the next phase of the cycle, and so on and so on.
Yeah,
And
that's
so my work is based around that.
putting your hand on your heart and then asking questions and dealing with things is an old Native American technique. I don't know if you knew that. Greg Braden talks about it a lot. Yeah, I've used it quite a few times. It's very powerful.
It
Um,
is very powerful, but a lot of people dismiss it, or I haven't got time to do that, or it's not important, or I'm not important enough.
that's
Other
called
people come first.
avoidance.
It is, that's right. And I did it for years. I was the expert at it. And I was also the expert of putting myself in victim mode as well. You know, look what my dad's done. Look how it's affected me. I haven't got my dad anymore, you know, and all of these different sorts of things. And it's so easy to do. And you don't realize you're doing it until you do realize you're doing it.
One of the
And
challenges is it's not about you. It's about his
yes,
journey, what he was going through, and how he solved it for himself. So,
and learning from that,
yeah.
you know, and this is what, and even though it was a difficult journey for me, you know, now I look back on it and I think I'm glad I went through that difficult journey so I could learn about me. I could understand me. I could understand all those thoughts and all of those feelings and what they meant, and learn to accept them for what they are, so that I could get myself through that next really difficult phase in my life and come out the other side, you know, with a smile on my face and come on, let's get this family moving in the right direction again.
Yeah, that's tough when you have a child that's still there but paraplegic. That happened to a friend of mine. That's in and of itself is a big challenge to go through because you don't
Yeah,
want to see your children hurt or die before you or whatever.
no, no.
So when you're working with people, do you have a goal for your clients? What's the end output or end result you want them to achieve when you work with them?
Yes, it's important to have a goal. A lot of people don't quite know what their goal is, and a lot of clients have very complicated set of issues, situations going on in their lives. And often it isn't until we really start working together that other things crop up. Oh, and there's this, and there's this. And so, you know, I work on a very flexible basis because of just the nature of human beings, and and ideas move, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I like to keep a flexible approach to my work so that we can account for all of that.
So, do you use any kind of complementary medicine with your practice, like essential oils or anything?
Well, um, personally, I do. I use essential oils. I use EFT, um, and they're all things that I encourage. And if somebody became, you know, responsive to it, then we would discuss the oils and I'd send them a little sample of an oil for them. Um, and, you know, do a lot of breathing. We talk a lot about mindfulness, you know, getting out in the fresh air, all of these different sorts of things that are so important. You know, and some people it's going back to basics about their diet, you know, what they're drinking and what they're eating, because they've gone so way off
Mhm.
um what, I don't know whether normal is the right word to use, but way off what is good for them, that we need to bring them back in. But these are all the things that I've learned along the way about me, and and when you're going through difficult change, it's amazing how way off you can become. We've all, I think most of us can say that we've done stretches of hospital visiting, haven't we? You know, I've looked after, you know, both my elderly parents, you know, my in-laws. And when you're busy looking after your children, going to work full time, then you know, walking your dog, doing your family stuff, and then looking after other people, whichever way it is, things get left behind, don't they? Like your
Mm.
own exercise regime, your own well-being, your own nutrition. going and seeing your own friends, all of these sorts of things. And we have to work really hard at remembering that we are as important as everybody else is in our lives. And that can be really tough too. And that can really make people feel guilty when we shouldn't be feeling guilty about things like that, should we?
Mm-mm. Yeah, self-care is always very important. So are your clients frequently on Western medicine, and how do you feel about that? How do you deal with that?
Um, well, I'm all right with Western medicine. Um, and and complementary therapies go really, really well next to it. And I've taken antidepressants in the past to help me through a really difficult stage. And that was when my son was out of hospital, we'd set up his home. And then, and amongst all of this, I was caring for both my parents. So I was thinking about what was going on where my son was living, what was going on at home. And so I did go and see my medical practitioner, and we agreed that I only wanted to be on antidepressants for 6 months, but using complementary. But that isn't the only way of approaching something like this. Other forms of treatment have got to happen as well, and this is where things like talking therapies, counseling, life coaching, using oils, reflexology, Reiki, shamanic journeying, all of these different sorts of things are really, really beneficial. Getting out in the fresh air, getting your exercise, eating properly, sleeping properly, all of these different sorts of things have a massive influence on us all of the time.
So going at it from multiple facets, different angles.
Yeah,
It is pretty
yeah.
complicated, and I don't think most people today have a lot of experience in terms of what to do, although it's starting to happen. I mean, it's in the news a lot, so it's probably better. Back in '83, it was probably really challenging because you had no one to talk to that had been through it, probably. So that can be.
No, and no, and all we had was each other to talk to about it. And I come from a family that's very stressy, and you don't
Oh,
talk about your feelings. And you know, my dad said, "Well, you can come and talk to me about it," but he was going through his change himself. He
yeah.
was focusing himself on what he wanted, and was he really going to understand my side of things? And then my mum was obviously really struggling with her own thoughts and feelings, and actually she'd known for 10 years what was going on, and
Oh,
she'd had to deal with that on her own
ah,
for 10 years.
wow.
So I didn't really feel I could burden my mother with it.
Yeah.
And so it was a case of, well, we just need to get on, you know,
You can't do that.
great British mindset. Let's just get on with life.
Stiff upper lip.
It'll sort itself out eventually. And it did, because I just collapsed in a massive stressful heap.
Oh, so what do you do now for self-care?
I've got my dogs. I go out walking with them twice a day. So I'm out in the fresh air every day. I have my quiet time. I use my essential oils a lot. Um, my wonderful friend Sharon has taught me shamanic journeying, which has been a massive influence, and just really keeping a check on what's going on here and what's going on here, and keeping check on it, and practicing my gratitude. And also what I've had to do is learn to talk a little bit more to my husband, and and often it's the little things that are so important, when you're in the car and you're driving along, and instead of just looking at something go by going, right, oh, that's interesting, is actually express it, because then that leads on to easier conversation and other things. And also being a lot more specific about what I want from him, for example. So if I really want him to listen to something, I'll say, can you answer this properly for me, and not just go, you'll work it out. I need to have a think about it and really tell me what you think of that idea, or whether you think I'm being over anxious or overexcited about something, so that I get a better response from him, so I can manage it better. So yeah, talking as well is really important, and it's so difficult to do, isn't it? When you're all pent up with anxiety and stress and all of this uncertainty about what's going on in your head, and you don't really understand it yourself. And I remember when my dad told me that he was going to go through gender retirement, and he said, have you got any questions? I thought, I've got loads of questions, but I don't know what they are at the moment.
You're probably in shock.
Well, I was, and this was the other thing as well. He told me, and I laughed because I was so shocked.
Yeah.
And then, he was really hurt by me laughing. And I thought, oh, he's deadly serious. This is serious. This is. So yeah, shock is an interesting cycle of
In Chinese
emotions,
medicine,
isn't it?
when something really hits your heart, you will laugh like that. It's called overjoy, and that's when your heart has been hit really hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, he probably didn't understand that. But if I said something, someone laughed inappropriately, I know I just shocked them. Yeah, yeah, that's hard. And he was probably, well, even if he'd been thinking about it for 10 years, you said he started when he was a kid, a small child. So
Yeah.
who knows what all he'd been grappling with his whole life, feeling like he was in the wrong body, and he didn't look right like he should. Because when I was young and I didn't understand reincarnation, I knew I had the wrong parents. I was supposed to have brown hair, brown eyes, brown skin, and speak Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't understand it. Well, what happened is then I met Master Samantha, and she said, you were my student in the Dominican Republic in your previous life. I went, aha, my previous life leaked through. And I think that's what's happening for a lot of people today.
Yeah.
Their past lives are starting to leak through, and we're remembering, because I've been a man and a woman. I've been all kinds of different cultures, different languages in all my lives. So until you start to remember that, it's going to make you crazy. Like, who am I really? And then you start to discover that gender doesn't matter. You are who you are.
But I'd never thought about, gender fluidity, or, you know, wanting to be a different gender in that way. So, thank you. It's given me food for thought how that has.
Yeah, well, when we look at the animal kingdom, there are some animals, particularly I know of a fish, I don't remember the name of it, where if there's too many females, some of the females will become male, and vice versa. If there's
Yeah.
too many males, they'll literally
Mm.
change their gender.
Yes.
You'd have to be a pretty, like a fish, simpler mammal, a simpler animal in order to be able to do that. But I know that some birds will change over time depending on the food, so it's part of our adaptability.
Yeah,
But
survival, isn't it?
in 1983, that would have been quite a shock. today we hear about it, all over the place in the news. And, I know people that are changing or their children are changing. So
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
not as difficult
Yes.
today as it would have been 40
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah. And thank goodness people can be more open about it.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen some interviews of some people who actually were born with both genders.
Yes.
And that's a lot more common than I knew. I thought that was rare, and it turns out it's more common today. And sometimes they decide on a gender when they're an infant, and then they grow up and they wish they'd picked the other gender. So it can get.
Well, I mean, it's decided at birth, isn't it, by the doctors?
Mhm,
What gender is this baby going to be? And that's where it starts. The mix-up starts, isn't it? Or
mhm,
can start. And then it must be, like with my dad, it must be really traumatic to not feel right.
mhm. And
And some people go through gender reassignment and then still not feel right, and they've been through all of that trauma to get to where they are, and they're still not whole. Mhm.
yeah, it's tough. And then it affects all your relationships. Do you tell someone ahead of time or not? And if you tell them later, are they going to hate you, or are they going to say, "Oh, I love you anyway"? Yeah, it makes life really complicated as if it isn't already. Wow, that's quite a journey. Well, you have a great free gift for people, 10 steps to emotional balance. So if you're on YouTube, I'll have the link down below. If you're listening to the audio only, you can find it on Cath's website under resources. So you would just go to the website and scroll down to resources. And her website is Cath Lloyd, CATHLLOYD .co.uk. So she's in England. So that's cathlloyd.co.uk. Cath, do you have any closing comments for our audience?
Yes, I do. And it's going back to self-honesty. And it can be really tough to practice it, because it's rather like, being a private investigator. You've got to delve through all the dark and dingy passageways in your mind to for why search for the why. But it's important to really keep going with it, even though you're going to perhaps feel guilty for what you're thinking and feeling, feel ashamed of what you're thinking and feeling. But once you accept all of those and acknowledge all of those, it really does make you it really does make it so much easier for yourself when you come across the next difficult situation, whether it's you've had an argument with your mother-in-law or your mother or your husband or your kids, and really thinking about what what part you have played in that scenario. And but it's also important to forgive yourself for the things that you felt guilty and ashamed about. And um and then you will get to a stage where life just feels lighter, because you are in more control over what you're thinking and feeling. You're still not going to get it perfect. You're still going to make mistakes. But again, it's about putting your hands on your heart, really connecting what's going on in here and what's going on in here, because then once you truly believe it, you're in a lot stronger position to go, "I'm sorry," or "I would really like to work this out with you. How can we make it better?" And also, it's a great way of starting to separate the facts from the fiction. what's the fact in the situation, and what is that great big rambling long story that you've created around that fact that's escalated everything. And then when you can separate that out, it really helps to organize your emotions, your thoughts and your feelings, and you can start to leave things behind. So please practice that hand on your heart, self-honesty.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. It's a great way to help even making decisions that are hard, that you might even feel emotional about, and
Yeah,
just
that's right.
tuning into what's inside. Very good.
And you may not know the answer. And, I had to do this, when my son was in recovery and getting his new home organized. And because, he wanted to stay 288 miles away from us, and I didn't know whether my husband and I were going to get through it.
Mm-mm.
And I had to do this. Luckily, I'd got a really, really physical goal to help me do it. And I thought, I'm going to sort this out by the time I've got this 1.5 ton of hardcore in the skip. And I'm giving myself 2 hours to do it. And I'd worked it out, what I wanted or what I didn't want, and then I could start working on how to rebuild what was negative inside of me about the relationship. My husband didn't have those thoughts and feelings. He knew we would get through it, but I didn't, and I had to do that hard work and work it out. And we've got a stronger relationship than we've ever had. We're a stronger family unit than we've ever been.
Yeah, talking things out helps. It's when you don't talk it out if you get in trouble.
Even just starting to talk it out through with yourself is the starting point.
Well, I find saying things out loud gives it a whole different feeling. Did I say that? That's why I journal, because you journal it and you go, what am I writing? Oh my goodness. Just, what am I thinking? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, it does make a difference when you express it and not just let it run wild in your brain over and over again.
Yeah, that's right. Download it. And if you don't like writing, we've all got a device where we can record something. And when you're journaling, it doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't matter if you can't spell. It doesn't matter if you're politically incorrect, because this is about you and what you're downloading and letting it free so that you can start moving on.
Well, Cath, I love talking to you. I could talk all day.
And you.
Thank you so much for being our guest today. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the show. And remember to be the light you want to see in the world.